2, 1.
Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. I'm Councillor Peter Southgate and I'm chairing the meeting this evening. It is a virtual meeting. It is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel and only the elected members will appear on screen alongside our guests at the appropriate agenda items. Can I just, let me introduce members of the Commission, and if you just raise your hands to indicate. My Vice Chair, Councillor Peter McCabe. Then next to me on the screen, but maybe not on your screen, Councillor John Dehaney. John, Councillor Ed Gretton. Thank you, Ed. Councillor Joan Henry. Hi, Joan. Councillor Sally Kenny. Sally to be our newly elected mayor just next week, so we'll be sorry to lose her to that role, but for a year. Councillor Paul Kohler. Councillor Nick McLean. Councillor Natasha Irons. Mansour Ahmed, our co-opted member. And finally, Councillor Owen Pritchard. Good. So no apologies for absence. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? No, thank you. So straight on to the first and substantial item this evening, which is our first opportunity to meet our new borough commander. I did send a note to the borough commander this afternoon saying it's the first time in 14 years I haven't been able to welcome a new borough commander personally, which I regret, but we are where we are. And I've suggested perhaps that if I could ask you please, Chief Superintendent, to perhaps say a few words first about yourself, then we will, and your career in the police to date, so that we've got some background. Then I'm going to ask you to say a little of your reflections on COVID, the experience of lockdown, and although this is rather springing it upon you, your thoughts on the challenges facing you now we have a more sort of stringent approach to social gatherings. Then we will come on to the questions we supplied you in advance in writing, and if you would respond to those, and I will then ask the members who raised those if they want to come back on any particular points. We'll then take other member questions and finally just review the statistics that have been supplied to us, both for Merton and in comparison with the BCU as a whole. So if I can hand over to you, please, at least to tell us a little about yourself first.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. Can I just check you can hear me okay?
Fine, fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, a huge thank you to you for inviting me to this meeting, and to your colleagues on the call as well, and anybody else watching. Very happy to be here, and sad also not to be able to see you all face to face. I think it might be too much to hope for that we can see each other before Christmas, but sometime soon, I hope. So a little bit about me then. So I was a direct entry superintendent when that scheme was brought in 2014. So it's quite a controversial scheme, but has been quite successful, I think. So I joined in 2014, as I say, and went into Wandsworth Borough and policed there in the neighbourhoods and response policing role. I then went to Westminster and the Royal Parks between 2016 and 2019, doing a range of roles, but including neighbourhoods and safeguarding roles. So I've got a really good grounding in local policing. The role that I had just before I have come into this role was, I think, quite a relevant one for some of the topics that we're going to cover today. And that is, I was working in the central community engagement team. So my main role, not that I expected it to be this, but my main role was community engagement work throughout the COVID pandemic. And then have come over to the Southwest BCU to look after Merton alongside the other boroughs. Had a really fantastic handover with Sally. Came over a few weeks early, and she's been able to introduce me to lots of partners, and importantly our people as well. So I live in Kew. I've got 2 boys, 13 and 14. So really, passionate about our local area, and also hopefully being, relatively local to you will be very accessible to you as well. So I'll pause there.
Okay, and thank you.
Shall I move on to the context?
Yes, please, I think so.
Lovely. Okay, so a hugely interesting time for all of us. I mean, who could have predicted that 2020 would be like this? So from a policing perspective, I think the main thing that we've been grappling with and continue to grapple with is how to make sure that we enforce the law in obviously the way that the government and our communities who've elected them would want us to, but also do that in a way that's not damaging to our relationships with communities, both at the moment, and doesn't give us any legacy issues for the future. So that's been really important to us. And the way that we've done that is, as you'll know, is that we talk to people, explain the regulations, ask them to adhere to them, and only take an enforcement action in relation to COVID as very last resort. I'll come back to where I think we are from Monday in a second, but the other issues that we've been facing are during the main part of the COVID pandemic, we very happily saw crime levels in a lot of crimes go down, including the jokes that get made about shoplifting. Shoplifting was very down, because obviously there were no shops open, but we also saw drops in violence as well, which is very welcome. And what that meant is that officers during that time, and we had very low sickness actually during the COVID pandemic in our offices, which was fantastic. They were able to go out in local areas and be proactive, and really just address issues where they saw it. One thing I think we might touch on later that was a concern though during the pandemic was obviously the safeguarding perspective. People were in their homes, cooped up for longer, and we worked closely with local councils on issues relating to that. But the bit that we've seen, the crime type that we've seen a real spike in, and we must do something to stem that, is on domestic abuse. Something that was very close to Sally's heart, and it is also close to mine. So I imagine that we'll come back to that later. And in the last week or so, we have been policing, often in central London, the Extinction Rebellion protests alongside others. So what that means from a local and Merton perspective is that at times we have lost resources into the centre of town. As you know, it's the police's role to address protests and make sure they're COVID safe, but also allow people's voice to be heard. And I certainly wouldn't want to stray into personal opinions about any of the causes. But again, I think we've been really successful in how we've dealt with it. So we've tried to, take enforcement action if necessary. Otherwise, we're still speaking to people and encouraging them to go home. We had a challenging summer in terms of unlicensed music events. We had a few unlicensed music events in our area, but not the volume seen elsewhere. And happily then, that's when we got resources back from central police teams into our local area, including Merton, and they were able to patrol. So it was August Bank Holiday, it was a great example. People were from other departments patrolling alongside our local officers and keeping things safe. From Monday, of course, we've all seen the announcement last night that now, in an effort, I understand, to hopefully head off any more widespread lockdown, that groups of 6 are more than 6 people are not able to congregate outside or inside. We will, of course, have an enforcement challenge in relation to that, and we're already putting plans in place to help us. And when I think, I'm sure that the people here tonight will agree that it's, you know, what's really important is that possibly rules have been a little confusing, and perhaps there's not parity between different rules in different situations. So that's where this approach I talked about earlier in terms of engaging with communities, it is really important, because it's actually quite possible that lots of people we'll be talking to, who we might see out in parks, for example, actually might not have seen the news. You know, possibly there are some amongst us who think we'll get the same thing if we watch the news at the moment, and perhaps have stopped watching it. So we'll be taking the same approach as normal. So I'll pause there, Peter. Shall I go straight on to questions? Or?
Yes, can I just pick up on, you touched a little bit on the statistics, and I did note the rise in domestic violence. That's the one figure that's gone the wrong way in the last 12 months, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
The other figure I noticed was an astounding rise in the number of ASB complaints, up 60% odd.
Yes, yes.
Is that a reflection of people's responses to the way other people were behaving during lockdown? And
yes, there were two main factors actually. So I am expecting those figures to level out. So the two main factors are, firstly, that a significant proportion of the volume in those ASB figures, the antisocial behaviour figures, did come from people complaining about other behaviour during the COVID pandemic. So where they saw people behaving in a way that they didn't think was congruent with the law or guidance at the time, they would make a call to us on it. The second main area is that we did see, when lockdown did ease, a greater volume of people in a smaller number of places, particularly congregated around our green spaces and open spaces. And I think the lack of availability of a more widely spread places to socialise did give us some concentrated pockets of antisocial behaviour. But the teams have done great work, and I'm hoping to see that come down.
okay, thank you. Yeah, yes, and do please now go on to the other points where we supplied you with the questions in advance.
Yes, of course. So I was asked a question about our safer neighbourhood teams and community policing in wards. So I have a colleague with me on the call who can certainly step in if I, so that's Bob, who can step in if I get any of these figures wrong. But I think the main answer I want to give to that question is that Merton neighbourhood teams are very almost up to strength in terms of the people we've got in roles. We do have 3 PC vacancies, and we're expecting another couple to come up. And we have, as I mentioned, we've had so far, and I do hope this continues, very, very low rates of absence during COVID, which has helped us have low numbers of people shielding. And in fact, in this team, the only 3 colleagues are currently shielding and working from home. We do have a small number of officers who are not able to fully patrol the streets in the same way as other people, but that is only 1 sergeant, 1 PC and 3 PCSOs. And there are another small number of 1 sergeant, 4 PCs and 1 PCSO who can do the vast majority of their duties. You will have seen in your roles, I'm sure, content on the neighbourhood strategy that went out fairly recently, where wards have been clustered, and I know Bob would take questions on this, into to give them both a volume priority and so that's where we're seeing a lot of something. So that could be antisocial behaviour, something that is high harm, so something we feel is particularly affecting that ward or cluster of wards, and also an individual ward antisocial behaviour challenge as well. And that there's been some great work on that. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, I've just looked up. So I think, Owen, you asked about the establishment, didn't you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Do you want to follow up on that, or are you happy with what we have so far? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll follow up really. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Right.
I suppose where we're coming from is that when we did this previously, what was exposed was actually the limited amount of flexibility within your organization that you have. Really, is that lots of people under your command are in specific functions, and those functions are largely fixed. And this resulted, if I remember right, well, I do remember rightly, specifically two concerns of mine. One is there was a lack of surge capability, and that was because surge capability. Let me pull this a bit closer. A lack of surge capability, because lots of people were, doing their jobs, and this is, none of this is a criticism. It's just, but the surge capability was an assumption for such things as the antisocial behavioural strategy and the knife strategy. So actually, when you look into let's look at the ASB strategy, let's look into the knife strategy, it says we'll use surge to tackle ASB. And then when you look into the numbers, there's actually no surge capability that you have, because everyone is committed elsewhere, and the limited amount that you do have is often deployed for several London events. So that's your comment on that, I suppose. So question one is, how much flex do you have under your command as a percentage of the sort of total numbers under your command? Second is, what do you feel your surge capability is, and do you feel is it sufficient to fulfill the strategies that we currently have in place? And then thirdly, what became clear in a couple of wards to do with community policing was that when police officers, be they police officers or support officers, were on long periods of leave, either through injury or maternity leave or paternity leave or disability or whatever, they weren't the high TNO wards weren't backfilled as a priority from either low TNO wards, or they weren't backfilled from surge capability, or they weren't backfilled at all. And I was wondering whether or not you're going to keep with that policy. So I think they're the three questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, lovely. So I'll start answering them, and then Bob, if you wanted to add any comments from a local perspective, because you'll have greater historical detail than me. So surge capability, crucial, absolutely. So we have this cluster strategy now, and the DWOs, the dedicated ward officers in each ward, are working much more closely together, and they're able to bid at the tactical meeting for extra resources to address priorities. So I'm not going to sit here this evening and say that that is perfect, but I know that Bob and his teams have, following the previous meeting, put into place things that I think will be very helpful on that. And I'll come to Bob in a minute. Do I think it's sufficient? I do think that the BCU model that we've got at the moment is helpful, because we are able to pull resources across between boroughs if we need to, in a way that we couldn't do before. So we have, over 1,500 officers, which does give me, as the BCU commander, flexibility to move resources to where I think it's needed most. In terms of backfilling, it would be I would not want high TNO wards to not have a permanent presence. So I would want to be alerted by Bob and his peer group on any issues in relation to that. Because for me, that it's not acceptable. It's obviously not avoidable that the person is off sick or whatever the circumstances are, and we would wish those people well, but we must cover those crucial roles that are operating within communities. So thank you for those questions, Owen. Bob, do you have anything to add?
Again, to highlight the cluster side of things, that because I'm very aware of who's off long-term, short-term, and the staff movement, I also know who's likely to be moving in the near future. I have a very careful eye on that. So I'm in a position to flex across the ward. So as the boss has just said, there are clusters of wards, 3 or 4 wards will work together. So if there's one person who's gone sick or is adjusted duties, they will often be assisting with other wards that are their neighbouring wards. So the sort of 3 or 4 wards together of, say, the Figs Marsh cluster, the Mitcham Town Centre, the 4 wards will work together. So if one person is off sick or is adjusted, effectively it's a quarter of a person, because the wards will work together. They will flex across each other, and the sergeants will flex across the different wards and look at dealing with any individual problems.
Sorry, Bob. Sorry, Bob. I am going to interrupt because you managed to do that trick of making me less happy than the initial answer that came from your boss, which is because that cluster about Mitcham, all those wards on Mitcham's are high TNO wards. Figs Marsh is, Cricket Green is, Pollard's Hill is, right? They're all high TNOs.
That's 2 clusters.
Yeah, no, I know. Everything in the east of the borough over there is living on it, and when we went is high TNO, and when we went through a period 2 years ago, I believe, in Cricket Green, of people being on of a long period where 2 people were on leave for different reasons, the backfilling from another high TNO ward was exactly what I was talking about, the shared resources there. And regardless of whether or not you could, the common denominator that you're using for geographical proximity is ward or cluster, what I'm talking about is the backfilling to the high TNO clusters from low TNO clusters, rather than just letting high TNO clusters suck it up.
But part of that is also about where I post people. So where I carry vacancies, I consider very carefully where my vacancies are, in order to look at how, where I need to put those people in. So I'm very aware of where the vacancies are, and often the vacancies are held in the longer term in some of the lower TNO wards. I've also got...
I don't doubt that, and I'm delighted to hear that, but we're not talking about the longer term. You know, what the point I'm making is very specific, is about the unknowns, the unknown sort of leaves, the unpredictable leaves, or the partially predictable leaves that come through disability, paternity, and maternity, etc. And when they occur within high TNO clusters, can we get the backfill from either elsewhere in the 1500 or from low TNO clusters, rather than just letting those clusters suck it up?
It's very difficult to do that, because obviously to move people between the wards has a significant effect. What I can say is that the number of people it's very limited in those numbers. And I've also got people who I'm flexing in from. I've got a couple of people on attachments for a 6-month attachment that I've got coming in, and I will put them into the wards where I've got that vacancy, shall we say. There's also obviously a legal issue about where I can and can't move people in and out for things like maternity leave. So I've got issues about that I keep a very careful eye on, to make sure that the entire borough is looked after. But all of the borough
I have a great deal of sympathy with what you're saying, because of the movement, and this goes to the core of the initial question that I've given, which is, how much flex do you have to backfill locations? Because the ASB strategy for those high TNO wards is what we're talking about. So the 2 questions were linked, right? Is that they're the ones that often deal with the knife crime, deal with the antisocial behaviour. And what we're talking about is that the lack of both the 2 police officers and 1 PSO, or whatever the case may be, and a lack of surge capability. You've just given a list of completely reasonable answers as to why you can't do it, but that's different from what the Chief Superintendent said about, you know, that we would look to achieve it. And that's the core of what I'm trying to get at, is that 2 years ago, we uncovered that you've just got to kind of deal with it for all the reasons you've said. And I want to see whether or not that policy is changing.
I mean, we've got that surge capacity across the BCU. So in the higher harm areas, I bid frequently and get frequently a lot of extra staff of the plainclothes gangs units, the violent crime task units, who all come into those high harm areas as that, shall we say, surge capacity. I do have flexibility to move people. Occasionally I have moved people between high demand or between low demand wards to high demand wards. I do have the ability to do that. I don't like doing so because of the impact it has on both the officers individually and the ward it's being impacted on. But we have a lot of surge flexibility across the BCU for other resources that are not just my DWOs.
Okay, I think the chair's patience is wearing thin with me. So let's pull it there. That's the marker in the sand. Let's see what transpires. Thanks.
Yes, well, I want to move on now to Councillor Gretton, Ed, because you had a question down, didn't you, on community?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for attending, Chief Superintendent. I know that when Sir Robert Peel established the Metropolitan Police, I think it was back in 1829, right at the core philosophy, if you like, it was all about visible policing in communities. It was all about connecting with communities. It was about being out and about, and it was about being proactive, and it was about prevention. And so I'm delighted the Chief Superintendent has talked about proactive policing just now. That's terrific. And I take on from Councillor Pritchard's references to the safer neighbourhood teams. I think where we see in Wimbledon Park, I mean, a few years ago, for example, probably under the previous Mayor of London, there were 6 officers dedicated to the safe neighbourhood team. Under the current Mayor mopac regime, we've seen more of an aspirational statement saying it might be up to 3, it's 2+1 kind of thing. But what we've seen in practice is, yeah, some gaps where people have been off for some reason, and we fought hard in Wimbledon Park to ask for the 3rd officer to be out. But however many there are, how do we actually make sure that we're not just paying lip service to proactive policing and prevention? How are you, as the new Chief Superintendent and Borough Commander, making sure that the officers are out and about, visible, connecting with communities to really help on the prevention, as opposed to just playing a reactive response when things go wrong and crime happens? Thank you.
Right, let me begin with that. I think I think I've faithfully made a note of all of those elements of the question. I'm also going to cheat by just answering a little bit of the previous question as well within it. So yes. So what I've noticed when I've come into the BCU is that we have 23 vacancies for dedicated ward officers. And it's important to me that we bring that figure down and we get dedicated ward officers back into all of the wards. So I've started some work on that. Also, if you look at the public attitude survey, one of the questions that I'm always confounded that scores really low is, do local communities know who their local officers are? Do they know who to contact? Now, it could be something about the way that the question is asked and answered, but the percentages are so low, around kind of 14, 20%, much lower than for other questions. I really want to do something about that. And one of the things that I think could work really well is, firstly, there's the marketing, which is beholden on us to do, of who our officers are and how you can contact them. But there must also be, if we want to operate in a professional way, which we do, some idea of what the other avenues for contact are if that particular officer is not available. And I think that will go some way to addressing some of the points that Owen made, not the surge capability point, which I think I answered, but the point around, where do you go if your usual go-to person's not there, and who's actually looking after things faithfully. So on the Peelian principles, I think you did well and listed off most of them there. Maybe my favourite one was missing, which was around the police are the public and the public are the police, and the police just perform the duties that are incumbent on every citizen to keep their community safe. So so that one's really important to me, and I want to really increase our reach into the community and also some volunteerism as well. Proactivity. as I mentioned in my opening, we've been really able to do proactivity when we've had lower crime levels and less available people on the streets. It's been much easier for us. But we have recently invested heavily in the violence suppression units and the burglary and robbery teams, which operate across the whole BCU and are being very effective. And I will continue to invest in those. Crime prevention, the department that I came from was a community engagement and crime prevention site. So what I've identified coming to this BCU is that this BCU, amongst lots of others, doesn't actually make best use of the resources that are available to us from a central perspective. So we have specialists in crime prevention who sit in Scotland Yard, who have access to national networks of crime prevention information. And strategies and what works and the whole evidence-based policing. So I want to bring that more into South West BCU, and actually had a conversation yesterday with Roger Arditi, the neighbourhood superintendent, about doing exactly that and getting those links better. So that is very much on my mind. Roger, with a number of his team, is actually at the moment putting into place a proper and fuller community engagement plan, which has elements of the work that mopac do with communities as well, and brings in some of the best practice from that. So there are a few embryonic things that I feel confident are in place. So proactivity's there, we'll maintain it. Crime prevention could be better. There's a few emerging issues, aren't there, that are important to us all, like the theft of catalytic converters, which affects people in the pocket greatly. Those kind of things I'm looking to make a dent on over the next few months.
Okay, thank you.
Very brief comeback to everybody. Are the ward panels have not really been, or have the ward panels actually been meeting across the borough? Because my impression is they've struggled a bit. Obviously, you can't have the physical meetings. And has the green light been given to all the local safe and neighbourhood team ward officers so that they can actually hold Zoom meetings or something like this with the local community? So I'm not sure they have been happening as to every quarter.
Great question. So I know from a BCU perspective that some panels have been happening virtually and others haven't. So Bob, perhaps you could answer the specific for these wards.
We are trying to have them virtually. A lot of the wards have sent out recent surveys. We're using a virtual ward panel as much as we can. We are working on different options on how we can actually get some of the ward panels, but I'm also looking at bringing the ward panels back in a physical perspective as soon as we can. And I'm discussing with the teams exactly how we can do that, in what larger rooms within buildings, or what other opportunities there are for actually having a physical ward panel meeting as soon as we can. We are aware of it, and it's something we're working on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. We had some questions which from Natasha, in fact, around low-level nuisance. Are you happy to go on to that?
Yeah. Let me. We're going slightly out of sync, aren't we, on the question?
Well, you define this. Yes, you define which area you want to take next, and we'll.
No, I'm happy. I'm happy with your approach. So yes, no, do go ahead.
Yeah, so, I think it kind of all fits together really, because it kind of all ladders up to the same thing, in that,
yeah,
you know, the residents, especially in our ward, have massive problems with mopeds who just go up and down, and they report constantly, oh, you know, kids are hanging around here, and that kind of low level, it doesn't feel like a massive crime, but actually it's a consistent nuisance for people, and then moves on to more serious crimes. They don't feel that there's anybody there to capture that and to kind of address that. So you either have to have a really awful, horrendous crime happen to you, or be involved in a community group. But anything in between that, there is just, they feel completely left to deal with it by themselves. And I wonder, kind of, what are we doing to tackle that kind of low level nuisance, that kind of, it's not dramatic, it's not sexy, but it's stuff that really does bother people and actually can lead to a lot worse.
Yes, I think there's two things there. I think the first point I'd make is it's something we're trying to address on a multi-agency basis, particularly with the councils, because yes, it is low level. So I take that in the spirit it's intended, but I do also think, and I know you would think this too, that it really affects how safe people feel in their homes. So I am aware that perhaps if residents have that kind of activity in their streets, then particularly the vulnerable residents, they will get themselves into a position where they just don't want to leave the house. So that kind of perception or fear of nuisance is very important to us. We have been increasing the work that we're doing with community protection warnings and notices, and also there's an antisocial behaviour early intervention scheme that we're starting to do more work with. But I think there's also, and I'll pick up on this with the teams, there's a bit of an education piece as well to the communities, because I have heard so many times that communities don't want to bother us with this kind of thing. So there will be cases, of course, where people have made multiple reports and felt they're not being dealt with, and those have to be escalated, and I'd be happy to hear about any of those, as I'm sure Bob would. But I also know that there'll be lots of cases where people feel that they don't want to bother us and they don't want to report. So I would say, please, to say to residents and people you come into contact with, please do report those instances, because it helps us build up a pattern of where we have the worst issues and then appropriately put resources in those places. Bob, did you want to add anything?
No, it was just to say the same thing, boss. Please ask people to keep phoning us, irrespective of what we can actually do there and then. The more phone calls we get, it allows us to use our limited resources in the areas where they can do the most good. Yeah,
and partners as well have lots of levers in this situation that we don't have. So that might be if somebody is identified as living in the area who's causing a problem and housed in the area, there are levers that can be pulled from a housing perspective to help them understand that their behaviour could have consequences if it continues. So that is definitely information that we routinely share with partners, and we just need to make sure that we keep doing that.
Okay, thank you. Staying, yes, Natasha's other area of questioning was around Black Lives Matters and what steps are being taken to ensure that the police are in fact representative of the communities that they serve.
Yeah, I think it's a bit, obviously it's something that is a hot topic now, but has been a hot topic since the 80s. So
I think.
Yeah, so I wonder, kind of, progress has been made, but I think we're kind of at a point where, at what what more can be done really, because we haven't got to where we need to be. So what are the plans in the pipeline for that? But then also in terms of the kind of policing on the ground now, there is a lot of talk around stop and search and the results that it can bear and what it can do to disrupt knife crime and very violent crime. But often, if it's not intelligence led, it just causes more harm to innocent people who are just walking around the streets and living their lives and being stopped for not anything else. So I just wanted to know, kind of, how much is that kind of stop and search strategy being led by local intelligence? Are we making sure that it's coming from that, so that, to Councillor Gretton's point about having neighbourhood policing,
yeah,
surely that intelligence will come from that, and are we making sure that the strategy is led by that way and not just stopping our young people who just hanging around minding their own business and making the situation worse?
I mean, it's a massive topic, isn't it? So let me make a few comments on it, and please do ask any follow-up questions if I haven't covered everything. So from a recruitment perspective, so we've had a long-held ambition that the Met should look like the communities it serves. So we have an ambition to have 40% of Black and minority ethnic officers working with us, and 50% female officers. Now, my understanding, I don't have the figures, the precise figures, but my understanding is with the 20,000 officers, so the Met's allocation of that is around 6,000 officers coming in. We have made great strides in improving those statistics, and it's been a real focus for us. And we specifically allocated roles to outreach teams, which are in the community engagement team I used to work in, and their whole job role is to go out into relevant communities who we would like to work with us and target them to come and work with us. Something I've been personally involved in is making some films that we've been showing to young people in different places. And they're actually our own officers in the films who it's just got a slightly different tone. There's a lot of honesty about what the barriers were for them of coming into the policing. So one of the officers says, "Oh, look, I had really bad service from the Met, and so I wanted to make it better, and so I joined." Another one talks about their experience with stop and search and how that made them want to do things. Others talk about how their own family cultural context meant that they had to fight quite hard for policing to be a career option for them. So I don't necessarily completely agree with some of our corporate messages around the fact that we're doing all we can. I do think that we need to do more, and we need to be more vulnerable as an organisation to this questioning and less defensive. And where that was really brought home to me is in the experience of our own officers, particularly Black officers. So after the very sad incident with George Floyd, we, for several good reasons, didn't put out a statement about how we felt about that as the Met Police for a few days. And the effect that had on our own officers was really bad, because they no longer knew if they felt part of the Met. They didn't really understand who they worked for if we weren't, as the Met, going to make a stand on that. And it was their voices that I think have really helped us as leaders in the Met start to see this differently. And then on the Southwest, you may have come across them, we've got a fantastic group of officers who operate under the name of the Fusion Group, who have been out speaking to communities about their experience with some of the MPs in Mitcham area. So that is something that I want to do a lot more with. And then lastly, on stop and search, it's something that is really difficult to get right, but we absolutely have to. So as you will have probably seen from the statistics, although we stop a higher number of white people compared to Black people, say, then when you look at that in terms of the amount of population, it is disproportionate. We are disproportionately stopping more Black children than white children, if I can be that blunt, because the age group is children. And it's interesting to me that since this issue's been highlighted, actually those disproportionality figures are slightly coming down, which does say to me that the public feeling around this is that is causing our officers to really reflect on the strength of the intelligence they're receiving. Because what we've got is this kind of chain of communication that leads us to a certain place that we might not necessarily go. So, for example, we will get intelligence that a Black male has been seen committing a crime and leaving. But what we need to be educating communities about is, what evidence are you basing that on? What exactly did you see? What other distinguishing features are there about this person? So it's something that really allows us to get to exactly who we think that is. The other sad fact, as I know you'll know as well, is that some of our Black and minority ethnic communities are the ones that are being disproportionately affected by violent crime. And that means that they then fall within that pool of people who we stop and talk to about it. But I wouldn't ever want this to be an issue that we stop talking about. And there's certainly, I feel confident there's things in place in the Southwest, like the Fusion Group, like some of the work we're doing with communities, that will help us start to push this in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Natasha, unless you want to come back, I'm going to come to Peter McCabe next, who raised the question about continuity.
I think Councillor Kohler wanted to follow up on something.
You do want to follow up, yeah?
No, Councillor Kohler did, I think.
No, I'm going to come later.
Okay.
to the the questions that haven't been pre-submitted, Natasha, and then yeah, by all means, Paul and Jonah will come to you. But Peter, you raised a point about continuity. It is true that in the 14 years chaired this role, I've been pleased to work with a great many borough commanders, and I hope we will have these with us for a good few years. But is this something you can comment on, or is it something that's done to you?
So these are just great questions, because I do agree with you. It is really important that we have continuity of senior leadership. So it is done to us in the sense that from a corporate perspective, there's what's called, as you'll probably know, a posting panel. We can put in preferences for where we'd like to be posted, but we are posted somewhere. Because we are police officers, we are bound to go to the job that we're posted to, unless there's an extremely good reason why not. And it can mean that people do get sometimes occasionally moved around at short notice. What I can say is that my personal intention is to be here for around 3 years. And that's not to say I don't want to be here longer than 3 years. That's my best guess of what the likely period is. And as I've mentioned, this is a dream posting for me, being local to this area. This area is very important to me. And I think, we've already talked about a number of issues tonight that are not things that can be solved in a period of a few months. So leadership is important to me, the continuity of it. The other thing that I would say, though, is that I think the police mentality is changing, in that we're moving away from a hero model of leadership into, they're buzzwords, of course, but into more, empowered staff and teams. And what I think that means, and particularly the focus on partnership working, is that we then have a network, we should have a network of relationships at lots of different ranks, in lots of different departments, with lots of different communities. And so if you then take one piece out of the jigsaw, then still the jigsaw should be fairly strong. So that's what I would say, is that we have to make it less about that one person who's at the top. But my personal intention is not to go anywhere anytime soon.
Thank you. Peter, did you want to come back on that, or are you happy with that answer?
If I could just respond that, like Peter, I mean, I've been a councillor in Merton for 34 years, so wow. I really have seen a great deal of coming and going. Now, I don't expect you to stay for as long as I have here, but I do happen to believe that successful organisations have stability, and that's quite an important ingredient in the mix. And I think, if you're saying that, it's not me, it's them up there who move the pieces of the jigsaw around. Perhaps if you do, after 3 years, go in that direction, you might impress upon your colleagues in the senior echelons that there are people who happen to believe that you get more success and better relationships and better partnerships if you're not constantly having to start again.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have got slightly more skilled at transferring information between different leaders. So, Sally, with the marvellous handover that she had with me, really thought that through, and it was, her final act of leadership. And I know that, Bob, for example, has already been with Merton for 3 years and hopes to stay a bit longer too. But no, absolutely, I will take that on board. And if I'm ever lucky enough to get up there, I will take that thought with me. But no, you're quite right. I don't think I'll last 34 years. I think you might be right. I'm rather fed up with me by then.
As they are here.
Let me take a couple of questions from other members. Let Paul first, please.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome, Liz. And sorry, these are a little disparate because these are things building up on what others ask you questions about. So firstly, on stop and search, we had a discussion last year with Sally where I thought you had a very blunt tool, a KPI, which was simply do more stop and search. Now, she did respond to that in part when I raised that to her. Is there still a KPI on stop and search? And what is your attitude to that? Because I know some of her colleagues felt it sent the wrong signal to young officers.
Yes. So I feel like you're reading my mind. So the KPIs, that is one of the KPIs, and you're right, it is the volume of stop and searches. I understand why that was there initially, because we had such a big challenge, such a big job to do in terms of reducing violent crime, and it is a useful tool in that. However, I'm not happy with that, so it will be going, that metric, and my view at the moment, which I'm consulting with Roger, the neighbourhood super on, is that it will be replaced by a measure that really draws out what we want to achieve from a neighbourhood perspective, probably something confidence related, community confidence related. So I can't sit here and say to you what the exact wording is. We're going to agree it on the 29th of September in our meeting, but yes, that one's going. Couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you. I'm very reassured by that. Secondly, I sort of turn to the macro level. I understood that there was an undercomplement of staff. We didn't have a full complement across the BCU. Are you telling me we now do have a full complement, or are we still understaffed across the BCU?
We are missing certain roles, so we don't have some people in certain roles, but we do now have a full complement. We're actually got more police constables than we have in our blueprint. What I would say on that, and I know that Sally also said as well, is that you may feel, and we also may feel, that still isn't enough. And so I know that she did welcome any any conversations that you had where you do ask for more officers. We will be hoping to fill our vacancies early next year because unfortunately there's a recruitment freeze at the moment. So people in the pipeline will now start coming in January time, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. And one last question, that's again reassuring, thank you. To what extent do sort of mopac requirements on the minimum number of community officers per ward, to what extent does that limit your ability to address flex and surge, or does it not?
It does a little bit. So I mentioned earlier that we've got 23 fewer dedicated ward officers across the BCU than we should have. And the reason for that is, well, there are several reasons, but the main reason is that we have used the officers who would have gone into those roles for proactive work in teams like the Violence Suppression Unit. However, I do want to make those roles whole again and to have a dedicated ward officer for each area. So that's something I'll be working to do. What I think, though, we shouldn't lose sight of is that those officers, as we talked about before, can club together and address particular issues. And as Bob said earlier, bid for extra resources as well. But I think we're in a bit of a conundrum with the resources, as you would expect, and we now do have a position where our response team, so the ones that answer the calls in the cars, we've got more people than our blueprint numbers in those roles. And I think that was needed initially because those officers were investigating their own crimes. We wanted to make sure that we had slightly more officers so that those investigations could be of a high quality. I think now that that has bedded in a bit more, we're now in a position where I'm more comfortable in releasing some of those officers into neighbourhood roles, and I'm confident that we're in a position where if we do that, hopefully when we do that, that our response time shouldn't suffer.
Thank you.
And Joan, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you both for your support, and thank you both for being here tonight talking to us. What I would like to ask either of you can answer. Will we be still having delegated officers within our schools? Because as you may realize, there are quite a lot of issues around schools nowadays. And yeah, just would like to find out if we'll be still having delegated officers. I know we usually have some and they have been withdrawn. Will they be coming back?
Bob, do you want to take that one?
Not quite in my ballpark, boss, but I can answer as much as I can.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to let you have a voice before I lost mine. No. So, Jane, I don't have the figures for the schools officers in front of me, but I can get those. But I do know that officers have now started going back into schools. There are targets that are set by mopac in terms of increasing our schools officers. So we were all funded in terms of being given headcount or roles for additional schools officers to go into priority schools. But I believe that those are some of the posts that have been vacant and officers diverted to violent crime. So that is something that if the chair's happy, I could look into and provide a written answer to in due course.
Please. Yeah.
Thank you. Chair, can I have another question?
Well, I think one more, Joan. I mean, clearly
Okay.
we're straining the borough commander's voice here.
Thank you. This is not in your report, but it's a concern of mine. What
Yes.
I've noticed that there are more persons sleeping on the street, especially shopping centres, for instance, in Merton and in Morden and Mitcham, and also we have more beggars on the street. Sometimes people feel a bit vulnerable having these people around. I mean, are there anything can be done to stop this happening?
Yes, so this is an area where we're working very closely with councils, because it's councils that would take the lead on those issues, and we would be in support of them. What we found that's happened, as you probably will have seen, is that during COVID, people in those unfortunate situations were rightly housed in temporary accommodation to take them off the streets. And now some of those arrangements are coming to an end. And also the evictions from premises are likely to start giving us increased number of people on the street. So our officers that are out and about are briefed on the numbers that they can give to people that they see on the streets to call for help. And I know that the council officers do street counts, but it's something that is a big issue across London, of course.
Okay, good. Ed reminds me, he had a question down on carbon reduction. I think we will make that the last one. I don't know whether you had a chance to prep for anything on police plans for carbon reduction.
Yes, this was something I must. Sorry, did you want me to go ahead or?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So this was something I must admit I didn't have personal knowledge on until I asked the question of colleagues, which is shameful given the context of Extinction Rebellion. So we are, I now understand, within the Mayor's London Environment Strategy that sets carbon reduction targets for GLA members. And so we have been asked to set a 60% reduction target from that's from the 1990 baseline, and we've got a 5.8 reduction of carbon emissions since the last financial year. So we are ahead of where the GLA would want us to be in terms of those figures. We are going through, as you'll know, including, which I'm surprised I haven't been asked a question on yet, about the estate strategy. We're refurbishing lots of buildings, and when we're doing that, we are putting into place the things that you would expect to see in a modern environment. So that, from the materials that we're using for the refurbishment to increased electric charging points in yards. Just looking for other areas that we're talking about. So we've got there's something, and I'm sure people on the call will know more than me, called green project targets, and we've got very good ratings on those. We've been putting in more solar systems. We've got 24 of those across the Met at the moment, And it's something I started in parks, actually. We are slowly transitioning to having a greater proportion of electric vehicles. There are some roles for which, of course, electric vehicles at the moment in their current capability aren't suitable for because of their versatility, but there are a lot of other roles that can use electric cars. And so we're moving a lot to those. And I was challenged when I was in Royal Parks to get the fleet electric for that, and I did that. So I'll keep working on that.
Good, thank you. We have kept you.
Oh, yeah, was that? I had one question actually. So my question on carbon. It's great to hear that data strategy with all these thousands of new officers coming in. Sounds like you've got more of a need now for Wimbledon Police Station. That's great, but specifically on the carbon reduction on electric bicycles, we put forward a great scheme in our ward, Wimbledon, to get an electric bike to our local Safer Neighbourhood team, so they get out and about more. And it's and the issue that's prevented us is not our funding of it, but it's rather the police and Met's insurance. And the message they got back was they're not sure they got the insurance cover. So I think the thing is, it'd be great to have electric bikes and around the ward. It gets the local officers out and about. It's very sustainable. Is that something you support, and is that something you can try and fix the insurance on, so we can deliver that to our local?
I cut on that because I made that decision.
Oh, okay.
I had that exact discussion with the fine ward officers. I would point out that the ward officers do have regular bicycles, as do all of our dedicated ward officers who have access to the normal bikes that we do have in effect. Part of the issue to do with the electric bikes was the longer term costs. So it's not just the initial purchase costs, it's the ongoing repair costs and the ongoing cost to maintain. There's the training, there's insurance costs are separate to that. But the biggest issue was about the total amount of money. So if you looked at, and I didn't really look that hard into it, but the cost of the bike itself is only a very small percentage. So an example I would point out for the normal bicycles is I have to pay £150 a year to make sure all of my bikes, each bike is repaired, retained and maintained up to the appropriate standard. If you were having an electric bike, my initial comment about that was it would be significantly expensive. And I don't think that the money that was being put forward was going to cover several years worth of 2 electric bikes. Yeah, if you could tell me the amount of money that you've got available, but effectively, I'm probably looking at 10 grand for each bike.
Yeah, we included a sum of 50. We looked at the capital cost of the bike and we increased it by 50% to cover 3 years maintenance. And we offered a further come back to us if that's not 50% is not enough. So that's what we offered to date. And we thought that would be attractive for 3 years maintenance at least. Of the bike cost. But we will follow up.
And I think we're going to take that one off screen and
follow up to me directly with the amount of money you're talking about, and I will certainly look into that.
And I'm going to close, having kept at least busy here answering questions for a full hour now, which I think is an awful lot on your first visit to us, Lise. But thank you for that, and indeed to Bob too. I noticed Bob refers to you as boss, whereas he used to refer to Sally as mom, but I'm not getting a lot of questions about that right now. Just to say that we greatly look forward. I hope you better come back again in 6 months' time, and then we can go on to all those other questions about the estate and that kind of thing. But a very valuable session this evening. So thank you for.
Thank you, Peter. And could I just say that through the questions that have been asked, they've been all really valid and important questions. And I've got a real sense from the group that everybody's got a drive to make Merton better, make Merton safer, and work together. So, of course, if anyone ever wanted to contact me offline, more than happy with that. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And our very best wishes for the challenges you face in the months immediately ahead too. Thank you. Okay, let's come on to our next item, which is Safer Merton, and we'll bring in Kieran here. So I'm on item 5, page 11. Everyone with me there? and the same item on domestic violence, violence against women and girls. I'm looking around for Kieran.
I'm here.
You're there. Good. Welcome, Kieran. Do you want to take a couple of minutes to introduce your items here, and then we'll ask you questions?
Absolutely. So this paper outlines the work that Safer Merton has been doing to contribute towards community resilience. It covers 3 specific areas. So we've provided an outline on our work to respond to hate crime. We've also given a bit of a summary as to the work we're doing around Neighbourhood Watch and how we're developing that in the borough. And we're also, in the paper, you'll find information about Merton's Safer Neighbourhood Board. If I can just highlight a couple of key areas. So in terms of hate crime, one of the headlines is that we have seen a steady increase in overall hate crime since April and May this year. And the predominant area of hate crime that we've seen arise in has been racially motivated hate crime. So that's one of the headlines in terms of that. And also, we've provided some key updates and examples of work that we've done. That includes the hate crime advice surgery with Tell Mama and Partners. So I just wanted to highlight that despite the lockdown, what we've done is, we initially provided a drop-in service, but we completely upgraded that in terms of doing more sort of telephone call-in and advice. So what we've done is we've sustained that service during lockdown. Also, just to highlight that we've got Hate Crime Awareness Week coming up for 2020. That'll be from the 10th to the 17th of October. So we're currently planning all of that in terms of social media, etc. So we are absolutely continuing with the delivery for this area of work despite the lockdown. In terms of Neighbourhood Watch, the key headlines for that are that we've got 478 coordinators across the borough and a total approximately over 22,000 members for Neighbourhood Watch. We work very closely with the police around Neighbourhood Watch. We're familiar with the areas where we may want to increase Neighbourhood Watch, particularly where there's increases maybe in burglary, etc. But we found Neighbourhood Watch quite, extremely invaluable to us over the lockdown period because we've been able to communicate some regular messages for that. And in terms of the key areas work for Neighbourhood Watch, we are really focused in terms of expanding our membership into those areas, and we've increased our engagement with National Neighbourhood Watch Association as well. And also just to highlight, we are one of the a few boroughs that ran a junior neighbourhood watch, extremely successful last year. Part of this is around rolling it out into schools. We did have something slotted in to deliver for 2020 and 2021. Unfortunately, that is something that could potentially be impacted on as a result of COVID. And just to highlight a few points around community engagement that's funded through mopac for the Safer Neighbourhood Board. At 2.26, we've listed 6 projects that we were looking to commission through some funding that had been available through mopac. This is discretionary funding. So together with the board, we received the bids. We had some extremely good bids. So 6 projects that are listed there. Unfortunately, recently we've had communication from mopac that given that they need to look at the savings that they need to make, there's a pause on this discretionary fund. So we have communicated to all the groups that have put those bids in. We're working closely with them. And although the report at 2.27 says that we'll get an update by the 31st of August, we did check with mopac today, and I'm sorry that I don't have any further updates for you as to whether that funding is going to go ahead or not.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Kieran. Let me just pick up something on the neighbourhood watches, if I may, on page 19 there. I'm really quite interested in the big disparities between wards in the number of neighbourhood watches. I mean, maybe the council is concerned, but Wimbledon Park, there are just 7, and yet Cannon Hill 69, Lower Morden 69.
A small number of large, very effective ones, I think, in Wimbledon Park, Chair.
But Ed, let me ask, I mean, looking at this, would you want to see the number built up or?
No, yeah, there's some which have fallen away just because, you know, people were chairing the local neighbourhood watch and they just have become less active, so they've been deemed the thing. But yes, any help we can have from heads team, safe neighbour teams to get them going again. And yeah, we've got one or two which are probably too large, and but it's about the door knocking, getting them out. I know there's funds available. And just agreeing the comms before that happens, so it's really clear to people what they've got to do or join up. Yeah.
And absolutely, it's the door knocking element that has been affected by recent lockdown. That was something that was scheduled to be done this year to increase those numbers.
And conversely, both Sally and Nick, you've got a very large number of neighbourhood watches in your respective wards. I mean, how does that
we've got a very
work out?
We've got a strong ward panel, and indeed that number was inherited. It was at that level when I was elected in 2018, and it's maintained. We were about to have a big push again before COVID to try and get that. My target is to get that to 100. We've got nearly about 69 watches, but we're sitting at about 69% coverage, and it's always been my ambition through my first term to get that to 100.
So it's coverage really that's key, yeah.
Yeah, it's coverage.
And Sally, any take on it? Sally, can you unmute? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. No. Sally, we still can't hear you. Can you? No. Okay. Sorry. Do we have other questions for Kieran about this report? Mansour, and then John. Yeah. Mansour, please, your question. We can't hear you, Mansour. Right?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Kieran.
Yep, here now. Okay.
My question relates to number 2.4 of page 12. As per the figures breakdown for the financial year 2019-2020, Mutton witnessed 359 reports of hate crimes, which is an increase on the total of 330 for the previous year. I just need to know what action has so far been taken to reduce these crimes. Thank you.
Okay, so hate crime's fairly similar to domestic violence, where we accept the fact that there's underreporting amongst the community. So some of the activity that we undertake as a partnership is to increase the report. So if we're doing, if we've got launched the third party reporting scheme, or we're doing particular publicity, etc., we actually are trying to get more people to report hate crime. It's quite challenging to conclude whether there's an actual increase in hate crime incidences themselves, or whether we've had an increase in confidence and reporting. So although we want to on one hand reduce hate crime, the measure that we usually look at is reduce repeat victims of hate crime. We'd like to increase the reporting of hate crime, but reduce repeat victimization. And that is a demonstration for us that we've actually provided an intervention to sort of reduce repeat incidences.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If John can.
Yes, Chair, I just wanted to know how effective is this neighborhood watch scheme? When they report crimes, are they vigorously followed up by the police, and their results coming from the reports?
So Neighbourhood Watch is extremely effective. Earlier on, the Borough Commander spoke about the relationship with the local community as well. So on one hand, there are eyes and ears, and they do provide reports of incidences that are taking place. But on the other hand, we've got a cohort of community spread across Merton where we can quickly message them about particular things that are happening within their ward and on their street. So they're extremely effective in us pushing out the message at a street-based level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Macaulay,
to reassure Mansoon about the hate crime issue. I mean, there was a rise in July this year. This is because of the racist attack due to the death of George Floyd. And there was a lot of people during the demonstration who were causing a lot of problems. And there was a lot of racist attacks on ethnic minority people. And that was the reason for the sharp rise in July, just to reassure you, Mansoon. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. And Natasha, you had a question?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions about, so there's a mention in here about bystander training, and that it was available to be given to the community. And I was just wondering how we access that and how that's going to be promoted. It seemed quite a valuable thing to be talking about.
Okay, so I have got Katie on the call to provide the detail on how we can access it. It's our chair of the hate crime strategy group who's been trained to deliver the bystander training. Obviously, there's a bit of a workaround in terms of how we deliver that training. So I think I've got Katie on the call. So Rose, can we bring Katie on?
Just bringing her in now.
Thank you, Rosie.
Hello, can you hear me?
We
Hi,
can
Katie.
hear
Yeah,
Katie.
hi.
We can hear you.
Yes, Maureen Bailey, who's the chair of our hate crime group, has been trained to deliver the bystander training. And as part of Hate Crime Awareness Week, which Kieran's mentioned, which runs 10th to 17th of October, Maureen will be delivering a session that will be available to the public and professionals. Off the top of my head, I think it's going to be on Wednesday, the 15th of October, but I'll confirm that as we finalise the details. So yeah, a session of that will be taking place during Hate Crime Week. And obviously we'd like to do more of that, so we'll have to think about how we roll that out further. I'd like to offer it to the Neighbourhood Watch coordinators as well. I think it'd be very useful for them.
Good. Oh, and you had oh, sorry, Natasha, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, because given that we've all kind of moved to this new virtual world, is it easier then to kind of scale up that availability of training and getting not just Neighbourhood Watch groups involved, but friends groups even? We could get out and kind of connect with other community groups who might be interested in being
absolutely.
allies and kind of, you know, raising this.
Yeah, Maureen's been trained from a hate crime perspective, but I believe there is a group of 5 or 6 people, employees at the council and partner organisations who are also trained to deliver the training. So I think it's Melissa Island from the council who's coordinating that. But for Hate Crime Week, we'll be rolling it out via Zoom as per all our events that week. So it's an opportunity where obviously people who can't normally attend the council chamber might be able to attend a session on Zoom.
Yeah. Owen, let me come to you.
Thank you. If it's okay, Joe, I want to switch topics slightly to crimes against women. Unless anyone, we've seen a rise in domestic abuse. We've also seen a rise in human trafficking and the use of brothels, although it doesn't explicitly say so. I'm assuming that that's female brothels. And we've also seen a line in there that it's about why that misogyny is not really a hate crime in this borough, but it's been trialled as such elsewhere. I suppose all 3 of those linked, and I just want to go to look at them and just say, okay, what can we do about crimes against women and hate crimes against women, and should we be looking to recategorize misogyny as a hate crime? Should we look to be recategorizing pimping and domestic abuse and those kind of areas, because they seem to be on the rise. I know we've said that only the racial incidents, but those two are also on the rise, and therefore it is a sort of concern about a specific demographic that represents over half the population.
Yep. So the next update that we're providing is the update on domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, and it covers the majority of the areas, Councillor, that you've just flagged up. So I'm just wondering that when we come to that item, I think it may cover up a lot of the questions that you've asked, because you know, dealing with brothels, etc., is one of the priorities that we're looking at over the next 12 months under our work around violence against women and girls.
Okay, and can we, in that then, can we specifically explore, because it's only because it was mentioned in this report, as to why other places have looked at misogyny as a hate crime and we haven't, and what the strengths, weaknesses and opportunities and threats of so doing are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noted.
Other questions on the Joan, please.
Thank you. Okay. I noticed nothing mentioned about hate crime where men and young men are concerned. Of course, I mean, I'm a woman, but I notice everything I've been around women and you know, young women. So therefore, I mean, men also experience domestic violence. They also experience hate crime. And I mean, how are you sending out the message that, you know, they need to come forward and they need to speak about the issues and concern that they're going through, instead of having it and end up become a mental problem? Because I think some of the issues around mental health where men are concerned, because they don't talk about things that are happening to them. They store it up in their brain and then they exercise it somewhere else. So I would like to see more talk about, you know, issues that men are experiencing and how they are supposed to come out and let it go so they can get some support.
Karen?
Okay, so just in terms of hate crime, that's not it's not services that we're highlighting any sort of gender-based sort of referral. So that's open for, you know, male and female, and totally appreciate what you say. And it just so happens that, you know, when we're looking at the reports that come in, they may show that there's more females reporting than males. So it's not the service itself, but you know, the raising awareness to report hate crime is for all sort of male and female. In terms of domestic violence, if I can just hold that second part of that question, because we have got that as an update at the next item, and I'll have Zoe on just to, because I will clarify whether some of our services that we offer are for male victims of domestic violence. Certainly I know across London, you know, a lot of the services that are provided, including IDFA, they are provided to male victims of domestic violence as well, but I can check that with Zoe when she comes on later.
Edith, you wanted to.
Yeah, I think just to explain to Joan, in terms of hate crime, as Karen has just said, you know, we don't split the two. You know, the two hate crime can happen against a man and against a woman. I mean, from my experience in the court, in terms of, we're coming to the domestic violence side of it, in terms of domestic violence with men, if you look at the ratio, I'm speaking as giving you figures that we have in the courts. There are over 95 to 96% of domestic abuse is caused by men against women. You will only find 1 in every 100 or 200, you know, cases that are brought to court, which are men related against women. There's more, domestic violence covers more women being attacked by men. So, and we do have a service, you know, in the one-stop shop. I mean, Karen is going to come to that, which covers all that. And the reporting issue, I think if you look at the figures we get from the one-stop shop, you can see that the numbers, the highest numbers are women being attacked by men and not men being attacked by women.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we've sort of already got into the domestic violence report, haven't we, Kieran? But if you wanted to say a couple of words in introduction to that, and just for my own sake, I think I understand it, but cuckooing, can you define that?
Cuckooing, make a note of that. So, Zoe, could you give a good explanation around cuckooing? Oh dear, your audio is not good.
No, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Sorry, Zoe, it's not working. Can I come back to you on that?
Sure.
It's further down in the report. What I don't want to do is confuse it with the cuckooing that we may do around burglary and other things. So I just want to be absolutely clear on that. So, sorry, Zoe, you're going to have to switch your audio off. It's not actually coming through.
On that point, Chair, can I just raise the matter of, when people are introducing these terms, because obviously we, as councillors, we are generalists, that people footnote or give definitions to these kind of things. And as we're on the question of language, learnings, is that different from lessons?
Oh, don't be so curmudgeonly.
I'm happy to step in and discuss cuckooing and cocooning.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, short version, cuckooing is, if I'm a nasty drug dealer, I go and take over Peter's house, live in there and deal drugs from there, and I kind of bully him, but give him a few drugs every now and again. That's the short version of cuckooing. There's various forms of it. Cocooning is where we provide a protective cocoon around a burglary victim by knocking on doors on the nearby addresses. They're two separate things, two separate words, but they do sound alike and are frequently confused. So cuckooing is using, sort of making somebody a victim, but often they don't feel they're a victim, which is one of why we have a lot of safeguarding problems with looking and supporting people who are the victims of cuckooing. Cocooning is a proactive thing to help reduce burglary.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, so
Kieran, let's come back to you.
Let me just make it clear that when Bob talks about giving Peter drugs, he's talking about you, Peter, not me, Peter.
It was a purely, fictional example.
Pick another name next time. So this report just provides a further update, because I believe you've had previous updates at this meeting around our work around violence against women and girls and domestic violence and abuse. So the key headlines here are the priorities areas of work that we're looking at delivering over the coming 12 months. So in the first part of the report at 1.3, we've just highlighted some key outcomes over the last 12 months. The headlines that I'd like to share with you is that our current VORG strategy was due to end in March 2020. We have a well-established Violence Against Women and Girls board. We're very lucky to have Rachel Wardell, who chairs that for us and provides some strong leadership to the partnership around this agenda. And a decision was made to extend the strategy and the delivery plan that we've got until March 2021, and that will bring us in line with the Mayor's report as well. But however, what we have done is we've reviewed the delivery plan, we've reviewed the strategy, and we've refocused some of the work where there's a specific focus on domestic violence and abuse, sexual violence and human trafficking. And at 1.6, I've listed each of those areas and the reasons why we're focusing on those particular areas. And the rest of the report, in terms of the body of the detail, at 2.2, we've provided you with some figures on the number of cases that we've had coming through the Domestic Violence Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Case Conference. That's where we've got high-risk victims that are referred into a multi-agency panel so that we can put some wraparound services around them and prevent any further abuse. So between April 2019 and March 2020, the MARAC heard 428 cases, and between April 2020 and August 2020, so this financial year to date, it's had 204 cases. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Yeah, Councillor Macaulay.
Just to let members know that the one-stop shop closed since the 23rd of March. They usually have physical attendance, but due to COVID-19, this hasn't taken place. However, the partners have continued to work together to deliver this service, where victims can still call the number and then report any domestic abuse. This has been ongoing for a very long time at the Modern Baptist Church, and calls have still been taken. And the one-stop shop will be celebrating its 10th birthday celebration on the 14th of September by Zoom at 9:30 a.m. And if anyone wants to join the celebrations, in the overview and scrutiny panel, you're free to join us, because we feel that it is important. It's 10 years ago since it was set up in Martin, and we like to celebrate what we have been doing, because the domestic violence is a very important matter in Martin. We've seen that since lockdown, the numbers of domestic violence around the country has risen quite sharply. But if we look at the figures in Martin, we have done very well. There has been a lot of people who have not reported matters. And the issue is there's some people, are sort of like especially men, they are causing problems to families, which sometimes is very difficult for the family to report. And because the courts were not sitting, so there was a lot of there's a lot of backlog in the courts, 6 months, I think 6 to 9 months, and now the courts are now hearing those cases which have now come to them, and where the one-stop shop is doing all the investigations to ensure that people are prosecuted for breaching their terms of not to contact or contact their partners, which a lot of them has been doing since this lockdown, and the figures on that has risen quite sharply. So we're still monitoring that. And also we are working on 2 domestic homicide reviews since 2017. And due to the vast complexities, the work still continues, and a final report with the Home Office is going through their quality assurance process. So that will be reported later on sometime this year. That's just giving you a little update.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. It's reassuring to know too that we're doing rather better than the national trend on this. Do we have other questions for Kieran on the domestic violence report? One from Natasha and one from Paul. Move on. Natasha.
Thank you for the report. I just wondered, with the one-stop shop, and you're saying you've gone into kind of like telephone calls and virtual, is there kind of capacity to keep that going long term, as well as the face-to-face communication when we come out of lockdown? Because it might be, making it as easy as possible for victims to come forward in any way, shape or form if they feel comfortable. But then my second question was around the design council work, that partnership that you had, and it sounds really interesting and a great scheme. And I was just wondering if there was anything within that could create an internal process for other teams to look at their work. Is there anything just from the process of going through, looking at what the service is providing and how it's working, is there anything that could be shared amongst other teams to assess how their processes are working and what they're delivering, and if any thought had been given to that?
Okay, so the first question around keeping the virtual one-stop shop going alongside, if we go back to how it was, I think it's something that I'll take back and consider. I think it's going to be around capacity, because it's a lot of the professionals and volunteers that come together to run the one-stop shop. So for me, it'll be around their capacity to participate in the virtual one, as well as being on site. So I'll take that thought away. But at the moment, we're going to remain virtual Part of it is because we're dependent on other organisations like victim support and their sort of recovery plans as well. So we're very much dependent on the other providers, and obviously using the facilities as well moving forward. So I'll take that back. In terms of the work of the Design Council, I don't know how much information has been provided previously on that. I found that the piece of work was extremely interesting and productive. It looked at speaking to victims around their experiences. It spoke to agencies around their processes, and it drew some extremely strong conclusions around how we could potentially improve the way that we deliver services to victims. Some of those things didn't come as a surprise. So it's around the victim telling their story once, being heard, not being passed around, multiple assessments by different agencies. There are various things flagged around how specific agencies were commissioned to deliver their own areas of work. For example, substance misuse will just deal with substance misuse, and then you've got mental health that will deal with that. And it is around how does that then complicate the journey of the victim. So I think the key thing about this process was that it was actually scoped through the eye of the victim, the journey of the victim, through all the various agencies that are there to support them. And Zoe and I, it's basically something, the report's been concluded, and Zoe, who's my lead for domestic violence in my team, will be looking at those recommendations and how we sort of move forward and maybe reduce some of those barriers that have been identified.
Natasha, you want to come back?
Yeah, just quickly, that sounds brilliant. So I was just wondering if there's any additional value we can get out of that the process itself, not necessarily looking at domestic violence, but could it be applied to, say, putting somebody first who's trying to access adult social care, or putting someone first who's trying to get their bins collected? Like, is there anything from the process itself that the Design Council brought in that we could learn and maybe adapt to other teams?
I think a lot of the local partnership had input in the scope. So there was some adjustment in terms of the modelling for this piece of work. So it fitted quite well with the work that we're doing on domestic violence. We are currently looking at how the same approach could be used around perpetrators and how they're managed through the criminal justice system. So I think the caveat for me around the approach is that, you can take something off the shelf, but there's always that little bit around ensuring that, there's that tinkering or review around if it could fit the business area that you're looking at. So I don't think it's a straight sort of pick and drop. I think there's always that quality checking to think, actually, can this process work? And already at the end of this, the officer that did this piece of work for us recommended potentially using a different type of model in this process that maybe could have brought out a little bit more. So I think there's a lot of local design that needs to go into the process.
Thank you. A last question from Paul, and then we'll close on this item. Paul.
Just a quick question of detail, please, Kieran. The Ask Angela campaign, do we have any figures on how often it's actually utilised, what penetration there is there? When I mentioned it to my daughters, they don't actually seem to know about it. Is it something, how do we communicate, and is it used?
I'm just seeing if Zoe's got her audio back up and running. No, she hasn't. No, she hasn't. What I shall do, Councillor, if I may, I'd like to just note, if I could just note that comment, because obviously we're looking at how we do the engagement and raise awareness around some of our services. So certainly we will look at building that in terms of making sure that that's promoted as part of the engagement. I'm sure it is, because Zoe's extremely thorough in what we do, and I'm happy to send out an email around numbers and how effectively it's used, if that would be helpful. Sorry, I don't have it at the tip of my tongue at the moment.
Okay, yeah. So if I'm just concluding on these two items, have a look at the recommendations on the very last page of the report on hate crime, page 42. And they struck me as particularly apposite. I would like to invite you really to endorse them, actually, that we revisit the profile of hate crime on an annual basis and continue to monitor hate crime detection rates for changes and so on. And those struck me as things that we as the Commission ought to take some responsibility for checking at least on an annual basis. So with your support, I will ask that we do that. Okay.
Yes.
Good. Let's go on to our last item on comms. You find that in the appendix, page 9. So I'm looking around to see if we have Matt Burrows on this, do we? Perhaps.
Yes.
Yes?
We're waiting for Matt.
Ah,
Chair.
okay, good. Well, glad you're here, Matt. Do you want to take a couple of minutes just to introduce this, and then we will ask you questions? And if you're speaking, can you put your mic on, or can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. That's
Sorry, my apologies, Jack.
You should know this stuff.
So, well, being a communications paper, I'll keep the summary short. I'm sure there are lots of questions. In short, this paper outlines a whole range of work that the communications team has been doing since very late February when we got the first notification of the first case at Wimbledon College, right through until the present day. It focuses really on splitting the work right across the pandemic into two pieces. Firstly, the channels that we've used and which audiences those channels reach, and secondly, the campaigns we've run on an ongoing basis. I mean, all members will be aware those campaigns have changed as national guidance and restrictions have changed. We've tried to give an outline of all the work between sort of February and now. Finally, it gives a short outline of our future priorities. However, I think it's, as all councillors be aware, that's all changed now within the last sort of 4 to 6 hours. So we're now looking at changing some of our immediate priorities over the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Half an hour, I think.
We talked about. Sorry, I was getting sorry.
So yeah, I could say, John, if you're chatting to Audrey, could you mute?
Sorry, Chair. I'm sorry about it.
Okay.
So the only update I would give to members before I take questions is that the final element of the report does talk about our future priorities. It talks very much about outbreak control and managing, kind of prioritising the management of risk in the event of a second wave. Those plans are obviously, in light of this afternoon's announcement from the PM, being slightly revised. But I think it's quite a comprehensive outline. I'm very happy to take any questions that members have.
Can I lead off on the exercise my priority, if I may? It does seem that the 18 to 30-year-olds are being, if I use the word demonized, but that's not the right word, but do you feel you've got in your use of social media the right tools to reach that particular age group? Have they moved on from Twitter? Don't ask me this stuff, but people tell me about TikTok and so on. Are we, are we using the right tools to reach this particular target group, which seems will be key?
It's a really relevant and very, very interesting question. So we use all of the tools at our disposal, no doubt about it. We have 3 main digital channels. We use Facebook, we use Twitter, and the council has an Instagram account as well. Instagram tends to reach the youngest audience, but has limited following. Twitter tends to be, so we have about 14 or 15,000 followers on Twitter. However, that tends to be largely local influencers, local community groups, certainly members, and I would say stakeholders as well. Facebook, we have about 6,000 followers, and Facebook tends to be where we get much more community engagement. So the different platforms reach different individuals. We have only really in the last 24 hours, 40 hours, started to really look at what we need to do now to adjust our channels to reach this kind of 20 to 29 audience that the government is now critical. So the council's strategy is always with communications to use the channels that it has to its best advantage. So we have those 3 channels which have a limited reach among 20 to 29-year-olds. I would, like any other council, I certainly wouldn't say we have a fantastic or a comprehensive reach into that age group. Very few councils probably do, I think, but we use the channels to the best that we possibly can. And other than that, we look at our standard channels as well, local press and outdoor media. But I think the audience that the government's referred to today will be a challenge for every council.
Okay, Natasha.
Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you and well done for all of the work that you've been doing over this period. I think you've done an amazing job of keeping people informed and keeping people positive over a very, very difficult time. My question about the future priorities, I only mentioned it because it came up at SOSCOMS about the low traffic neighbourhoods and how we're going to communicate around why they're there, why we're not doing the usual type of consultation, and we're having to do a kind of experimental traffic order consultation instead. It's just, I think other neighbouring boroughs have had quite a kickback from it, and I think although that there seems to be quite a positive cross-party support for low traffic neighbourhoods and tackling air quality, I just wonder how we're going to communicate that as a council that this is a positive thing and we need to give it a shot.
Yeah, so there's you're right. There's definitely cross council support. It's quite there's a lot of support for it across all the London boroughs in terms of their PR teams. We aren't quite there yet with it, so we promoted through August. Our priority was active transport and the active transport strategy. I've got to be totally honest with the committee. Councillor Welton spoke to me last week and said we now need to get on with moving from active transport and move on to sort of low transport neighbourhoods and low traffic neighbourhoods. So I've got a meeting with him next week to start talking about it. We'll promote it again. Our strategy will always be to promote it as best we can through the channels that we've got. So any campaign that we have will be so the low traffic neighbourhoods will be September, October, and they will all do the same thing. They will go out through our Twitter channels, our Facebook channels, our weekly COVID bulletin, and into My Merton as well. So,
Okay, thank you for that, Paul.
Can I ask a bit more detail of that? What will your strategy be? Will it just be telling people about it or winning hearts and minds? Because I think there's a real issue at the moment.
So certainly not my place to determine cabinet or council strategy, but I think from a communications perspective, there's probably a short-term and a long-term job to be done. In the short term, we need the same as we did with the active transport strategy. We promoted the strategy that was there in front of us, and we found that because of the circumstances of the pandemic, because of the nature of the pandemic and the impact, people were much more willing to take up on a council transport policy than maybe they would have been in previous years. So we promoted the active transport policy, and people took it up very quickly. So I think in the short term, between now and the end of the year, we'll be trying to promote these policies wherever we've got them or wherever we've got low traffic neighbourhoods. The longer term behaviour change, I think, will probably be a 2021 problem to tackle, I think. But as I say, I think it's probably a two-phase approach.
Can I feed that one back to you in a way, Paul, and our role as ward councillors? I mean, I've read a very interesting Sadder and Wiser analysis from the Merton Residents Transport Group of what happened in Wandsworth. You may have seen it, suggesting that moving far too swiftly with no consultation in advance backfired very badly, and the lesson to be learned from that is that you do need to at least make people fully aware of what's coming and try and take them with you and carry the right messages, really.
Right. I think we councillors have got to avoid it turning into party political fighting, deciding if we have a common strategy and then working together on it. And I think there's a danger of just telling people about what's happening rather than selling the message about what we're trying to achieve. And that requires us to work collectively on that as a council, politicians and officers. I don't think we're there yet collectively. That's not a criticism of you, Matt. It's just that collectively, I don't think we're there yet.
Other questions or comments for Matt? Ed, yeah.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. I just wanted to ask Matt Burrows, when he's thinking about communications, is he, sorry if I dropped out just temporarily because of the battery on my laptop, but is he also thinking about informing all the councillors? So rather than just informing the public, but using the councillors as a way to tell the public, because I know we just mentioned the LTNs, for example, but sometimes we have things going on. For example, my own ward, Wimbledon Park, we have a really good event that's just been on in the park, for example, but none of the councillors and none of the community really knew anything about it beforehand. So you probably lost a week or two of good football there simply because people didn't know anything about it. So if you make more of an effort to tell the councillors and we can get it out locally through the residents groups and stuff like that, doesn't really matter what the political persuasion is, that would be a very beneficial thing, I think, and whether it's on COVID or whatever, I think that would be very positive and people would probably think more of the council at the end of the day.
So I completely agree. No argument there at all, Councillor. One of the things we started quite early on, back in early March, late March, I think mid-March, was the weekly councillors COVID bulletin. Now that I've only been at the council since I think early January, but that was the first kind of regular weekly update we'd started to put out to elected members, and we've had very good feedback on that. But you're absolutely right. Beyond that, we don't have a regular channel to communicate to councillors, all councillors on a weekly or monthly basis. So that is something that we'll be looking to put in place over the next few months. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I guess it's not. I'm just thinking about the wider campaign now to get people back into offices and the pros and cons of that. But I'm not yet clear what our stance is with regard to our own employees coming back into the civic centre. I do realise the constraints there and the fact that to ensure proper social distancing, we probably can't accommodate more than around 50% of the staff. But are there plans to use your team, Matt, to carry that message to staff? And what will the message be, actually?
Yeah, so our internal communications have been, as you would expect, fairly stepped up, and one of our priorities since lockdown sort of took place. So we've got about 1,000 staff working at home. We've updated our internal communications from weekly to daily. We've got monthly updates with staff now as well. Obviously, the role of the comms team is to reflect whatever the council corporate position is, and at the moment, that position is that we have, from the CFT group, a limited amount of occupancy under the current guidance that we can take within the civic centre and our other buildings. So we reflect those messages out to staff on a regular basis, as and when that changes. We've been very clear with staff at the moment. The message is that for now, there is no change in guidance, and once there is, we'll inform you, once again, or we'll update you. I can't put a marker on the council's position in terms of what happens in the future, but certainly the feedback we've had so far from staff during the course of probably the last 6 months has been very, very positive. They're very happy with kind of the leadership they've had in the interim as people have been working at home and people are managing. And we've had about an 85–86% response rate from staff saying that they're managing and coping very well within the current climate of remote working. But what the future holds will obviously be down to the council as a whole. But at the moment, I think our communications channels internally are particularly strong, and I think staff have responded from a communications perspective only very well.
Good, thank you. Unless we have other questions for Matt. Okay, I will. Matt, thank you, and also Mark and Caroline for being here for this item, for the work you're doing there. And you're going to be busy, aren't you? I can see that in the months ahead. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Our last item is the work programme. And in particular, I need you to give me a guide on whether the, I'm looking for it, the Equalities Action Plan is something that you want brought forward. It would have been down for our meeting in April next year, but we did want to consider whether in the light of Black Lives Matter, that we wanted really to get an earlier look at that and its relevance to Black Lives Matters. If you've had a chance to look at the action plan now, what are your views? I'm looking. And all right, I'll give you mine, shall I? It is that it is in serious need of updating, actually. The data in the action plan, for the most part, don't go beyond years 2017-18. And I just feel that the whole impact of the pandemic, and in particular on inequalities between East and West in terms of life expectation and also obesity, we really need to know where that sits now before we can make sensible judgments about the action plan. It all looks so pre-COVID that it feels like it unfortunately can no longer be relevant, because we're looking at a very different world, and one in which inequalities has been exacerbated. So I would prefer that we didn't take it until the data have been updated and the implications have been considered, which probably is about April of next year. But I do welcome your views. Peter. Peter, yeah.
Chair, that sounds very sensible. If we haven't got the data, then we should wait until we have got it. But I think we should encourage officers to gather that as quickly as they can within the constraints that they're currently working. And that, to me, is a common sense approach, and I support your proposal.
Okay, and Paul, please. Yep.
It was to say exactly that. Because if only up to 2017 now, by next year it'll only be 2018 unless we get a lot more data sorted out. So if we can ask officers if that's possible, and if not, what the constraints are, that'd be really useful, because otherwise we're just behind the curve all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Good, okay, that's agreed. And I could close the meeting had I not failed to ask you to approve the minutes right at the start. So I hope I can still do that now. We're happy to do that. Oh, sorry, I did want to, one point arising from the minutes is that Kieran has taken away our request last time that Wimbledon Modern Town Centres should be considered as part of a PSPO, Public Space Protection Order. You will recall you were quite concerned that they were not included last time, and looking at the recommendations to Cabinet on Monday, they are now included in a period of further consultation. So I was pleased to see that. Okay, otherwise, wish you all a good night and thank you for attending this evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Good night,
Thank you,
all.
Chair.
You too. Have a good night.
Thank you, Liz.